I told you I wanted to go out there and talk about some Canucks stuff today. That Sean Avery video was only an extra because that happened and I didn't really think it was going to happen, therefore we just slipped in the extra 3-minute video here. But this is the final video of the day, hopefully, because if something else happens then we're going to have to make another video. But I wanted to talk about what was discussed by Nick Kypreos on Tim and Friends. Now, Tim and Friends is Tim and Sid without the Sid. I assume they didn't want to go out there and rename the new show after Sid Seixeiro left as just Tim. So they went out there with the Tim and Friends name. They add on other people to join the show for conversation on sports every weekday, I believe. And what they do is they normally talk about hockey stuff. And Nick Kypreos happened to be on yesterday's episode of the show, and he had himself a little bit of a spiel about Brock Boeser and the Vancouver Canucks. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting this video in the title as like I'm doubling down or revisiting these entire conversations is because Brock Boeser to me is probably like the more interesting of the big Canucks trade pieces. I said it earlier in the week, and I also think I said it sometime with my friends in real life as well, that I believed at that time Miller was a lot more likely to be traded than Brock Boeser just because Miller is undisputably the best Canucks forward on the team. He's got an extra year at a cheap cap hit. Playoff teams are going to be calling, and they're going to be hunting down anybody who can help them out in the short term. And Brock, while he is good, and while he is supposed to be better, and while he is young, he doesn't have that same, okay, right now he is a number one player or a number one winger or a number one center that Miller has on the Vancouver Canucks. So in my head, I kind of felt like Miller was the more valuable piece, therefore he would be more likely to be traded should the Vancouver Canucks decide to go down a rebuild route. But I said all that stuff before we had the news that apparently the Canucks don't even want to trade Miller. They're just kind of pulling back on that, and they're like, hey, we don't really need to trade this guy. Let's go out and talk about some other players. Now, other players, indeed, there are a ton on the Vancouver Canucks that people can talk about. Tanner Pearson has been speculated to being moved. Obviously, there's the ones that we've discussed before, Kyle Burrows, Luke Shen, etc., etc., but Brock Boeser is probably the most interesting one here to me. Because if we go over Boeser, 24 years old, 6'1", 207, a right-handed shot, making $5.875 million this season, it expires at the end of the year. Now, his qualifying offer is $7.5 million a year. And what the qualifying offer is pretty much what an NHL team gives to a player that is an RFA in order for them to retain negotiating rights to that player. Now, that does not necessarily mean the Vancouver Canucks will only sign Boeser to a one-year, $7.5 million contract. There are a few different outcomes that are possible. If the qualifying offer is not made, then the player becomes a UFA. If the player rejects the qualifying offer, he remains an RFA, and if the player does not sign before December 1st, he's ineligible to play in the NHL for the remainder of the season. Now, the best outcome, if you're a Canucks fan who wants Boeser to stay on the team, is for the Vancouver Canucks to re-sign Boeser like today. Sign him tomorrow. Sign him within the next 2 days or 3 days, because if you get the contract done before the qualifying offer gets activated, you can actually sign him to whatever. It doesn't have to necessarily be what the qualifying offer number is, which in this case is $7.5 million. The thing is, though, that qualifying offer is pretty big, and when you take a look at the Vancouver Canucks and where they are in terms of their cap management, I mean, they do have quite a few players that are making $7 million plus. Obviously, you have Elias Pettersson, who's making 7.3. You have yourselves Quinn Hughes, who's making himself 7.8. You have OEL, who is also making 7.2, but that's actually like 8-ish because there's some salary retained by Arizona. For Brock Boeser and the qualifying offer, it's really difficult to look at him and say, okay, yeah, $7.5 million a season. This is a guy that is worth that amount of money when you compare it to everybody else on the team. In a little bit of an aside, I wanted to talk about the Red Wings too, because in the early 2000s, mid-2000s as well, the Red Wings had themselves a policy that they pretty much upheld throughout the entire time Nick Lidstrom was there. You don't get paid more than Lidstrom. This was a policy that was enforced throughout many of their contract negotiations, and as a result, it limited the amount of money the Red Wings would give to star players, because of course, you're not making more than Lidstrom. That guy's our best player. If you wanted to go out there and say the Vancouver Canucks should do a similar thing, does Brock Boeser deserve $7.5 million? $200,000 more, okay, it's actually $1,500,000 more than Elias Pettersson. Do you think that's right? Do you think Brock Boeser could go out there and sign a contract and say, okay, yeah, I deserve to get paid more than Petey, because, hey, if you're getting paid more, that implies that you're better. And I don't know about you, but Brock Boeser, sure, he has had the Bruce bump as well with Petey, but Is Brock better than Petey? No, I don't think anybody goes out there and says that, right? This is what Kypreos said about Brock on the show, on Tim and Friends. He asks an interesting question on Tim and Friends. How much better is Brock Boeser than Tyler Toffoli? Boeser would have to start with a qualifying offer in the ballpark of 7.5. Is Boeser $3 million better than Toffoli? Now, this is a pretty interesting argument because, you know, both of them are Vancouver Canucks, or at least they were at some point together. Refried Bean has a reply that I wanted to read out here. Toffoli is better. 5 to 10 less goals, but he plays all situations, and he's a decent defender. Smart of Vancouver to cut bait on Boeser while they can. Boeser is really good at one thing, and that thing happens to be the hardest thing to do, so he'll get paid. Now, I personally do think there's a lot more to Brock Boeser's game than just strictly goal scoring. We've seen his playmaking improve, we've seen his passing game improve, we've seen his offensive positioning off the puck improve as well. There are some aspects of his game that I do think need improvement, though, still. Board battles, defensive efficiency, as well as, I'm going to say, reviving the spark that he had, because Boeser in his rookie season was an absolute lethal goal scorer, left, right, and center, bada bing, bada boom. He could just go out there and rip pucks in. He doesn't really have that same aggressiveness, I would feel, when I watch Boeser today compared to when I watched him 4 years ago. Toffoli, while he is great defensively and while he does score as well, he is also a lot slower too, which is another aspect that I think you need to highlight when you talk about Boeser and Toffoli. But when it comes to this Nick Kypreos thing, he also says this: let somebody else go out there and spend $7.5 to $8 million a year on Brock Boeser, like a New Jersey, like a Buffalo, but I don't think it's going to be Vancouver. Now, I'll say this right here. Boeser's not worth $7.5-8 million bucks. Sure, can he go out there and maybe get 30 goals in a year? I hope so, but he hasn't done that yet. He's scored at the pace of doing that so far, but as we said, he hasn't done that yet. His best season for a long time was his rookie season until the season last year where the team was riddled with the virus and injuries. 49 divided by 56 multiplied out by 82. Last year in the North Division, he was on pace for 71 points and 30 goals, but we just didn't see that come to fruition, unfortunately. Now, this year, there's a little bit of a taint because the Brock Boeser of the beginning of the season was bad, just like everybody else on the team was bad. The only good player was Demko. Travis Green really did kind of set this team on fire at the beginning of the year, didn't he? But Brock is not going to go out there and accept a $7.58 million contract, right? Or at least he's not going to demand it. I'm sure if he was offered it, he'd probably accept it. But, like, do we realistically think that that's where the contract talks are going to go? In my opinion, there should be, okay, you're not making 7.3 at the minimum because Elias Pettersson is making that and you're not on his level. So what exactly is the negotiation going to head towards? Is it going to be a 6, 6.2, 6.5-ish conversation? Is Brock Boeser significantly better today than he was when he signed his current contract back in, 2019? I mean, back then, he was at 56 points, 69 games, he was under a point per game-ish. Sort of in the same ballpark as where he is right now, just in terms of points. Of course, Boeser is probably a more better all-around player than he was back then, but as I said, you give and you take, there still is a little bit more of that lethality and that killer instinct that he had in the earlier years that has sort of gone away a little bit. I don't know. You can let me know in the comments below if Boeser is worth more now than he was when he signed this $5.8 million contract all those years ago. Do you think he's going to go out there and demand something in that range of 7.5-ish? Because if he does, then I think the Vancouver Canucks probably should go out there and maybe explore their options a little bit. See what other teams are out there that would be willing to pay up that qualifying offer, $7.58 million range, as Kypreos is suggesting. But for me personally, I don't really think that conversation is even going to happen. Like, if the Canucks re-sign Boeser to a $6-point-something million AAV contract that is fairly reasonable for the next, 3-4 years, I would not be opposed to that happening. It's just, there's a lot of money on the table with the qualifying offer, but there's a reason the qualifying offer was put in place in the first place, right? So talk to me in the comments, what do you think about this entire conversation over here? If you're a fan of the Devils and the Sabres, which are the two teams that Kypreos highlighted on his Tim and Friends bit, what do you think Brock Boeser should be worth contract-wise? I want to hear the perspective of other NHL teams' fan bases talking about this, because if your team is going to potentially go out there and maybe say, okay, he's on the market, let's go out there and make a trade, what would you feel comfortable giving this guy? For me personally, it's not too much over 6.7, 6.8 million bucks a year. But I know there are some Canucks fans that think he should be worth more, other Canucks fans that think he should be worth less. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, whether or not you are a fan of the Canucks or the Devils or the Sabres or whatever. Let's have a conversation about Brock Boeser. What are your thoughts about this? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this. 99. and bye.